Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, December the 17th, 2024. Yesterday I talked about Harry and Meghan. And of course Harry and Meghan are a controversial subject. I mean, there is a view that they should be left alone. What business of mine is it of mine? What's going on in their lives? Well, I suppose they are public figures. They are of interest. And also, what I'm trying to do in these videos is to sort of illustrate astrology, showing astrology at work. Now, I could, for example, talk about my theoretical great aunt. Not that I think I have a theoretical great aunt, but imagine if I did have a theoretical great aunt, and let's say she had Sun square Mars, and I could use the example of my theoretical great aunt to show how the Sun Mars square works. Now, you might not be interested in my great aunt, my theoretical great aunt at least. So you might not be interested in her life, but I'd have to explain her life because I'd have to give that Sun square Mars some context. Now, the great thing about someone like Meghan is I don't have to explain her. I can just say I'm going to look at Meghan. Everyone knows who Meghan is, so I can just go straight into the astrology. I mean, that I think is an example, but still, it was suggested to me maybe there was a certain lack of balance. I talk about Harry and Meghan, but what about Kate and William? Well, I mean, in a way I find Meghan kind of more interesting from Kate because I'm from the UK and Meghan is from California, and it's something about maybe Californian culture, whatever that is, and that's a culture that I'm not familiar with. So perhaps Meghan is more of a mystery to me. I can't quite figure out why she's doing what she's doing, and I kind of want to know, whereas maybe with Kate, she's British, I'm British, perhaps I have a greater understanding of her, and perhaps I'm not quite so curious about her. But still, I do understand there is a certain need for balance, and I thought in this video I would not look at Harry and Meghan, but I would instead look at William and Kate and King Charles. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit controversial in this video. I'm going to consider the astrology of death. Now, I need to be very clear about this. I'm not predicting when King Charles is going to die. I'm not going to be doing that. But I am going to go through, say, the theoretical process of how one might have gone about trying to predict when he was going to die. And I'm going to attempt to use the kind of system that the astrologer John Worsdale used in the early 19th century. So John Worsdale was an early 19th century astrologer. His specialization was predicting death, and he was a little bit unpleasant. He kind of reveled in his power. And so he went through his examples of how he was able to predict death, and indeed, in one case, he arguably encouraged someone to take action. He almost challenged someone to take action, and as a result, they wanted to challenge him, and they died. And so you could say that John Worsdale drove someone to his death. But I'll talk about that later in the video. I mean, what I need to talk about first of all is the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is December the 17th, 2026, and it's a Tuesday. And as always, I have to ask, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I would be really, really grateful if you were to become one of my subscribers. But so let's look at what's happening today. So here's a chart of today, set for noon, Tuesday, December the 17th, and you can see that the moon is still in Cancer. So noon New York time, the moon is at 26 Cancer. So actually the moon is coming towards the end of the sign, and the moon is being in Cancer. I suppose the usual things we have to say about it. It's in a water sign. It's quite sensitive, and it's in fact super sensitive, you could say, because the moon in Cancer is making a trine to Neptune. There is Neptune in Pisces, so moon trine Neptune. It's a trine that perhaps allows us to pick up on things, allows us perhaps to be emotionally aware, and also moon is sextile Uranus. So moon sextile Uranus is a slightly different energy. So we've got moon trine Neptune, moon sextile Uranus. Sextile Uranus, it's a mild aspect, but it may be that as we pick things up, as we're sensitive, we might come to some realizations, and using our emotions, using our feelings, we pick up things that we're not entirely familiar with. It might be a bit of a surprise for us. We can have this kind of emotional realization, perhaps, with moon sextile Uranus. But I must make it clear that moon sextile Uranus is a pretty mild aspect. Then we have Venus semisquare Neptune. You can see that Venus and Neptune are exactly semisquare. At the same time as the Sun is starting to move to a square of Neptune. So the Sun and Venus are in semisquare anyway. They're both planets are moving at pretty much the same speed. They're both hitting Neptune. Tomorrow we're going to have Sun square Neptune. Today we've got Venus semisquare Neptune. So Venus semisquare Neptune can be about confusion perhaps about other people. We may get the wrong idea about someone, or about their motivations, or what they want, and as a result we might reach the wrong conclusion. So that would not be something advisable. So try not to make conclusions. Try not to make decisions, particularly if it relates to another person's character. It may be that we might be deceiving ourselves, or someone else could be deceiving us. And it can work both ways. We might reach the conclusion that someone is terrible when in fact they're perfectly pleasant, or it could work the other way. We could trust someone who shouldn't really be trusted. Now, London time, late this evening, the moon does move into Leo. So the moon moves into Leo at 11:39 p.m. In other words, 21 minutes before midnight. So if you're in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that doesn't really bother you. I don't know I suppose if you're in the UK and you're up late, but in the last 21 minutes of the day, you might experience a change as the moon moves into a fire sign, out of Cancer into Leo. If you're in Americas, this evening might be different from the rest of the day with the moon moving into Leo. It may be that there's perhaps less reflection and there's more action, perhaps a greater sense of yourself and what you want to do and what you can do, and feeling a sense that you start to understand things, that things click together in that very fiery kind of way. Though still, even in the Americas, in New York time, that would be just before sort of 9 o'clock in the evening. Okay, it would be just before 6 o'clock in the evening in California, even earlier perhaps in Hawaii or Alaska. But still, I think that Moon in Leo is more a feature of tomorrow than today. Turning to the picture for Australia and New Zealand. Remember, if you're New York, the moon is at 26 Cancer at noon. If you're in Sydney, Australia, which is of course a representative of Australasia, then the moon is at 17 Cancer at noon. So the moon is much earlier in the sign. That moon trine Neptune is perhaps not quite so relevant, and probably the moon's main aspect looks to me like trine to Saturn, maybe a square to Chiron. But perhaps we should focus on the trine to Saturn, particularly earlier in the day if you're in Australia and New Zealand. And so you might find that it's perhaps a more organized day than if you're in the Americas. And perhaps you're going to be trying harder to structure yourself and not allow your feelings to run away with things. So there's a slight difference between Australasia and the Americas. But still, wherever you are in the world, the moon is going to be in Cancer for most of the day. In fact, outside the Americas, pretty much all the day. Now, turning to the heliocentric picture, so putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, arguably where it should be. So here's the heliocentric picture. And I'm not sure if there's a great deal to report here. Just a reminder here that Jupiter and Saturn are moving towards a square. The great thing about heliocentric astrology is that when we're talking about outer planets aspects, from a geocentric perspective, you've got planets going retrograde. And so you can say, well, we've got a Jupiter-Saturn square on this date, and then Jupiter goes retrograde, so then that breaks up. Jupiter moves away, and then it comes back into focus. And so we can have these aspects taking place over a long period of time. But at least with a heliocentric aspect between, say, two outer planets, once it's done, it's done. So here we can see Jupiter is starting to move towards that square to Saturn. And okay, it's going to take a long time to be exact, but it's just a reminder of the differences between geo and heliocentric astrology. And of course, that Jupiter-Saturn square probably has a lot to do with society and with the economy. And we had the geocentric Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020. And so that Jupiter-Saturn square it's like the first quarter, okay, not the first quarter of a lunar cycle, but the first quarter of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And it's where the cycle really manifests itself. And this, I suppose, is the stage of the cycle in which Donald Trump is going to become president. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think the next 4 years could actually be quite good, certainly at least in terms of the American economy. But of course, there is a Jupiter-Saturn opposition at the end of the decade, and that, I think, is when the party is going to end. But as far as other things going on, I don't think there's a great deal to report. Mercury is moving towards a sextile of the Earth. So over the next day or two, in fact, we're starting to feel it already. It is a time when there are things that have to be said, but I don't want to go on and on about the heliocentric picture because I don't think that there is really a great deal to report. So I will now look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, December the 17th, 2024. Aries, it's another day when the moon is in Cancer. And so when the moon is in Cancer, it is kind of a bit grounding. It's a time when you do value your security and your stability. And I mean, in some respects, Aries, you're not quite your normal self because you feel that there are things that need to be attended to. And if you are out there making things happen, doing the normal Aries stuff, you might not actually be able to accomplish much. So, stick to what you're doing, I would have said, and don't feel any great obligation to go out of your way, or to, and I know that you might feel an impulse to make something happen, to perhaps draw attention to yourself. But I think in most cases that impulse should probably be ignored or postponed. Though if you are in the Americas, then this evening the moon does leave Cancer and moves into Leo. So I don't know what your plans are for this evening if you are an Aries in America, but maybe this evening you might notice a change and you might want to do something that is sort of exciting and allows you to sort of show everyone who you are and what you want, and be yourself. But outside the Americas, then I would leave it until tomorrow, because tomorrow the moon will be in Leo. Tomorrow will be the moon will be starting to make a conjunction to Mars, and so tomorrow will, I think, Aries, be a very different day, and that's something I will be discussing. Now, as far as what you're experiencing, I mean, it may be that something else is going on that I think perhaps needs to be mentioned, and I think we have to look at the structure of Mars. So here's Mars in. Here's Mars. Mars is at 5 degrees 23 degrees Leo, and Mars is actually on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. I think you can actually see it. So there's Sun, there's Saturn. So Mars is opposition the Sun-Saturn midpoint. It's actually also making an aspect to the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. So that could be of some significance. Now, let me actually show you what I mean here, Aries. So if I look at let's say if I look at the 90 degree dial for you, so, and if I put Mars on the 90 degree dial, where's Mars gone? I'll show you what I mean. So here's Mars. Mars is your ruler, and there it is, Mars on the dial, and you can see that there's the Sun, and there's Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn moving towards a square. So Mars is on the midpoint of, on one hand, the Sun, and on the other hand, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I mean, I know that seems a bit sort of complex and obscure, but it is something I did notice, and we do have to consider what the condition of Mars actually is. And what this configuration might mean for you, Aries, is that you feel a certain amount of tension relating to the world in which you live. Remember, when I was looking at the heliocentric picture, I was talking about the business cycle. And I think, many Arians are actually trying to make sense of it, and not just the business cycle, but the way society is unfolding. The Sun kind of represents you, and the Sun-Saturn midpoint, the Sun-Jupiter midpoint represents how you are trying to relate to wider cycles impacting you, and it is somewhat frustrating, but it's important. And so perhaps it is a time, Aries, when you're realizing that you are really not in full control, that wider trends of a social, economic, even perhaps historic nature are inevitably going to affect and impact your well-being. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why you feel a little bit tense, a little bit frustrated, because you want to respond, because you can feel it, not just feel it, you can intuit it. And I think the intuition means that you are able to make connections about how it's all going to pan out. And in this sense, Aries, Aries is not a sign that's traditionally connected with prophecy. But there is something prophetic about Aries, and arguably the other fire signs as well. They don't make their prophecies in vague, watery kind of ways. They make their prophecies just by seeing and knowing how things are going to work out. It's all obvious, and it comes in a flash. And I think that may be what's going on. And you know how it's all going to pan out, and you know that there are going to be challenges, and you just want to respond to the situation. And today, although you'd like to respond to the situation, maybe you just can't. But I think it's going to be easier when the moon moves into Leo, and the moon is going to move into Leo very soon, whether it's this evening if you're in the Americas, or very late this evening if you're in the UK, and elsewhere it will be tomorrow. So Aries, perhaps it's a day for reflection and for considering what needs to be done and understanding how everything is going to work out and getting an intuition for it. And as far as action is concerned, well, nearly there, but probably not today. Taurus, the moon by and large continues moving through Cancer, and so with the moon moving through Cancer, it's another day when things by and large work to plan. I don't think there are going to be any huge surprises, although it is true to say that the moon does make a sextile to Uranus while moving through Cancer. So moon sextile Uranus might be about having strong feelings, understanding other people's feelings, and through these feelings perhaps having some kind of realization. Just something starts to become clear, and when it becomes clear, there may be a certain sense of surprise. You think, oh, is it really like that? And it might not be that the evidence is anything you can touch, anything you can read, anything you can talk about, but you nonetheless have strong feelings about something, and they may encourage you to actually do something. Though don't get entirely carried away on your feelings, because arguably the main aspect happening today is a semisquare between Venus and Neptune. So this does have an impact on you because Venus is your ruling planet. And so we've got Venus in Libra making a semi-square to Neptune in Pisces. And this Neptune in Pisces might be somewhat undermining, or it could be undermining if you handle it in the wrong way. You might jump to conclusions. I mean, I think especially with moon sextile Uranus, and these conclusions could be based on your feelings. You feel something is right, and as far as you're concerned, that's it, and you make your conclusions. But I think you do have to be somewhat careful. I mean, Taurians shouldn't get completely carried away on their emotions. I mean, Taurus is to an extent an emotional sign, but your emotions aren't necessarily your strongest suit. And if you were to allow your emotions to guide you in important ways, then you might be guided into, I suppose you could be guided into quicksand. So, Taurus, it is important that you don't take anything too seriously. Just because you feel something is right doesn't mean that it is right. And I suppose this particularly applies to other people and drawing conclusions about other people or trusting other people. So just because someone says something doesn't mean you should believe them. And that's especially the case if anyone is being emotionally manipulative, because right now on an emotional level, you possibly are quite easy to manipulate. So maybe you have to be careful about getting too close to anyone, particularly if you don't trust them. Because, Taurus, you do like to take things at face value. And if something is presented to you at face value, you might accept it. Just say, well, that's the way it is. But in fact, it might just be a lie. So don't allow other people to delude you, and also don't allow yourself to be deluded by your own fantasies and feelings. Gemini. Gemini, I'm not convinced that it's going to be a particularly important day. I understand that there may be a few things you want to sort out, and you may want to put yourself on a stable footing. That's always a good idea, and it may be a time when you don't feel that there's a great deal of stability around. So anything you can do to give yourself a sense of what is happening, a sense of standing on firm ground, especially in a financial sense, that is certainly worth doing. But I wouldn't feel that you absolutely really have to do anything. And indeed, it might be a sense, also a sense in which you're kind of moving from one thing to another, and you're not entirely sure of yourself. So that's possibly the way it should be, and there may, in a way, be nothing much that has to be said. Though, if we're trying to make sense of what's happening, we're trying to look at anything that might conceivably be going on today, there is a possibility that you draw the wrong conclusions. And every Gemini is looking at some level for some higher meaning. That's what every Gemini is looking for. They might deny it, but they still are. And the reason they're looking for a higher meaning is because Geminis are so good at splitting things up and for asking questions and for reducing things to their component parts. So for Geminis to find some broader meaning can be really hard work. But they can glom onto things and they can think, oh, I found it. This is it. This is the answer to everything. And Geminis can have this realization. And it's great until they get bored of it. But it may be, but with Venus semisquare Neptune, there might be a sense today in which you do feel that things are making sense, but perhaps there are coincidences that are all driving you in one direction, and it's all seeming to be becoming increasingly clear. But there is a possibility that it's a complete mirage, that it doesn't mean anything, and perhaps in your hunt for meaning, you may be inclined to believe people. I mean, there is a square between the Sun and Neptune. Now, that square between the Sun and Neptune is exact tomorrow, but I think you're going to be feeling it. And also with Venus making a semi-square to Neptune, it's going to be difficult to make sense of certain situations and certain people. It's so difficult that you might actually think it's just easier to draw a conclusion, just thinking that you've understood it all. Let's have some grand high level system, and you can fit everything into it, and it's all making sense. And ultimately, Gemini, unfortunately, it's pretty much based on nothing, and that's a shame. So try not to be too definite today. I mean, I know you'd like to be definite, but I just think it's going to be very difficult. Though, as far as other people are concerned, I think you can be actually quite dynamic. I think you're going to be quite good at making new friends, finding new people to interact with. Just don't have any preconceived notions. So let me just turn my phone off. I don't want my phone ringing, particularly when I'm talking to Geminis. I mean, it's a Gemini thing, isn't it? Okay, let me put me on airplane mode. There we go. Okay, no more disturbances there. Okay, so Gemini, there is a possibility here that at some level your social skills are actually quite good, and if you dynamically seek people out and you seek people's attention, then I think that you can make a good impression and people will want to get to know you. But again, just don't have any ideas. Don't have any ideas about how people can help you, how they can not help you. Don't have any grand schemes, because today is really, Gemini, it's not a day for grand schemes. Because if you have a grand scheme, I mean, it might feel good, it might make things feel simpler, but I think you'd be kidding yourself. You have to accept that things are complicated and ill-defined, and dealing with a world in which things are ill-defined, where nothing is certain, it's hard work. But perhaps at the moment, Gemini, that's something you have to deal with. And after all, Gemini, you always need to be able to keep your options open. Whatever you believe in, you need to be in a position where you can change that belief overnight. I mean, isn't that the nature of being a Gemini? Cancer, the moon is still moving through your sign, and it's making a trine to Neptune. Now, moon trine Neptune can be a somewhat difficult aspect because it can make things rather nebulous, and it's difficult in a way because it's too easy. One thing merges with another, and it can just get not complicated, but just vague, and who knows what's going on. But I think Cancer, you can deal with this. I mean, other people may not be able to deal with it, but it seems to you to be a quite natural energy, this moon trine Neptune. You understand that nothing is certain. And if anyone is trying to confuse you, you get it. And you also perhaps have a good understanding of other people's motivations. And perhaps that's why you're able to deal with moon trine Neptune. You can see confusion for what it is. You see deception for what it is. And the moment anyone is trying to mislead you, Cancer just knows it, and Cancer can be just very good at picking up on other people's nonsense, on other people's BS, I suppose, and that's just one of the advantages in being a Cancerian, because Cancerians aren't fools, and they are very canny. I think that's a good word to describe canny, to describe Cancerians. They understand what's going on, and they understand their own interests. And so you're perhaps in a situation where you are better placed than other people. Other people don't know what's going on, but you do know what's going on. And yes, that does give you an advantage. And at the same time, when things happen that haven't been planned, or just they come out of the blue, you're not fazed. That's because, the moon is making a sextile to Uranus. Sextile is a fortunate aspect. Uranus is a planet of events which hadn't been planned for, but because it's a sextile, when events happen, you just go with it. You don't panic, and perhaps you can sort of integrate the unexpected into your plans for the day. So that means that you do have a certain amount of flexibility, and I think that is useful. Now, one aspect which I think does need to be mentioned is an aspect between Venus semisquare Neptune. I wouldn't normally talk about this aspect for every sign, but the thing is that astrologically there is not a great deal happening today, and so that means that when there is an aspect, it takes on added prominence, and that Venus semisquare Neptune is a sensitive aspect, and it's more sensitivity. It's I've already suggested that you're able to take advantage of your sensitivity. The Venus semisquare Neptune is perhaps about the process you are going through in terms of trying to understand people. And Venus is in Aquarius, and Venus stays in Aquarius, I think, for the rest of the month. I keep forgetting when Venus leaves Aquarius and goes into Pisces. Venus ends, Venus does end the month in Aquarius, so Venus stays in Aquarius for the rest of the year. And so with Venus in Aquarius, your approach to other people is cautious, I would have said. And you just know that other people can't always be trusted, and in many respects you're putting a lot of people maybe on probation. You're giving people a chance, but you don't trust them. And with Venus semisquare Neptune, it's perhaps a time when it's kind of maximum confusion. I've said that Cancerians are very good at dealing with smoke screens and people trying to make things difficult and confusing. Well, Venus semisquare Neptune, this could be maximum confusion when people really are trying their hardest to perhaps be people they're not. And so you really have to be tough here, and whatever people are saying, however convincing they are, you can't believe them, and you have to see what happens. And it's not just about believing them, it's about trusting them to honour their promises. People always make promises, but these promises exist in the present, and although promises relate to the future, promises very often can't deal with the challenges of the future. And so this is perhaps how you're dealing with other people and what people are promising, what people are claiming, and this might also relate to money. There may be a financial dimension here, and it may be a situation where there is a promise of money. It may not just be a person, it could be an organization. Something is being claimed but may have a financial link. And again, you just have to be a canny Cancerian and just know that it's just words, and people will do whatever they can to get the advantage, and you know that it's just a time to wait, that things will be clearer over the next week. So there's no need to believe anyone at the moment. I mean, why believe anyone? There's no point, is there? I mean, things will become clearer later. So short term, there's no advantage in telling someone that you believe them. Okay, you can tell someone you believe them, but privately you might still have your doubts. Leo we do have to look a little bit at the sun. And so the sun is, of course, your ruler. And so we have to sort of look at the state of your sun. And the sun is starting to make a square to Neptune. And this square is going to be exact tomorrow, but it's very much in operation now. And so Sun square Neptune can actually be a rather confusing influence. You may be very sure about where you're going and what you want, and certainty is going to be important to you, but how sure can you really be? It's just so possible that you are deceiving yourself, or you're perhaps getting involved with something emotional without even knowing that it's emotional. You think it's normal, you just think it's your normal behavior, but your emotions are stronger than you realize, and your emotions are kind of acting a little bit behind the scenes. In other words, we might be dealing with a bit of psychological determinism, isn't it? Isn't that the phrase? So psychological determinism. I think it sort of relates to Freud. It's like it's unconscious is pushing us in a particular way, and we're not even aware of it. But our unconscious is very sure that it wants, if it's looking for a particular outcome, so it's trying to create this outcome, and maybe that's Sun square Neptune is telling you about it. So, Leo, do consider the impulses you are currently experiencing. What do you feel you have to do, and what do you feel completely certain about? So if you feel absolutely certain about something, and you are absolutely sure that it's right to do something, then perhaps you should think again, because you may be guided by something which might make perfect sense to you, to the darkest reaches of your unconscious, but it might not, in the light of day, make any sense to you once it's happened. After the event, you might be considering, well, why did you go and do that? So, Leo, do keep it simple, and be very careful about your own impulses, because your impulses could take you in places that, frankly, you don't really want to go to. And if you want to sate your curiosity, then, well, sate your curiosity in ways which are not going to be harmful, which don't involve any risk. So, I mean, I think I was talking about this a bit yesterday, that you might be curious about things which are dangerous, which are risky, which maybe relate to crime, and so that's fine. But you don't actually have to do anything. You just have to, I don't know, watch a YouTube video, read a book. It doesn't have to be practical. And so maybe that's important, Leo. I think that you do want to do stuff. You do want to take action, but you shouldn't. Because if you take action now, and indeed tomorrow as well, your premise may be wrong, and you may have found that really you're kidding yourself. So Leo, perhaps just keep it theoretical. Do things that aren't dangerous. Do things that don't have consequences. And in that way, Leo, I think that you'll be able to stay out of trouble. Though one small point I should make is that the moon is making a sextile to Uranus. And that moon sextile Uranus actually may be useful if you handle it in the right way. So Uranus is about your capacity to be original, to do something different. And the moon sextile Uranus perhaps is about you finding things out or having realizations about your ambitions, about your direction, about what you want to do, and you make this inner discovery, and you're not ready to act on this discovery, but the point is you've made this discovery. And so perhaps that's what you should be aiming to do today. So, do think about where you want to go. Don't think about taking action on it. That's not what it's about. But give it some thought and allow yourself to be inspired. And if you have an inspiration today, okay, you might be kidding yourself. That is possible. But just hold on to that inspiration. Hold on to it for a couple of days and see what it looks like. I don't know, today's Wednesday, Tuesday. See what it looks like at the end of a week. If it's still in existence, if it still makes sense by the end of a week, maybe you're onto something. Virgo, we have the moon continuing to move through Cancer, and the moon is, from your perspective, I would have said that's quite a good place for the moon to be. I mean, the moon rules Cancer, and so when the moon is in Cancer, I think that you generally get on with everyone. There's nothing about you that's at all jarring, and at the same time you're pretty sensitive, and sensitive, I think, mainly in a good way. You have, I think, a reasonably good understanding of other people and other people's limitations, and I don't think you're going to do anything that is going to rock the boat, and I think that your approach will be sympathetic, and I think people are going to like that, and that does mean that you have a chance to, I think, get to know new people, get to know more people. It's nothing dramatic, but it's just that by being quietly dynamic, giving people a chance to explain themselves, to talk about themselves, you might get to know more people, and more people will get to know you, and that's a good thing. I mean, I suppose that's a good investment for the future, Virgo. Being in a position where people know who you are, and they have some idea about what you can do, and so that I would regard as being something quite favourable. But Virgo, don't try to take on too much today, because the moon is the moon is in late Cancer, and it is void of course. So what that means is that the moon has made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. So the moon sure might be making a trine to Neptune, but it's still void of course, because Neptune is a discovered planet. It was discovered in the 19th century, so we don't count Neptune, Pluto, Uranus when we're evaluating whether or not the moon is void of course. So with the moon being void of course, nothing much is happening. And the advantage of the moon being void of course is that nothing much is happening in a negative way as well as a good way. So things are just winding down a little, and I don't think there's much pressure. So don't feel that you have to do anything or get anything finished. Okay, there might be a bit of pressure to finish something by the end of the day, but are you going to succeed? Probably not. You can probably wait until tomorrow, or maybe wait until the end of a week. So I don't think, Virgo, you have to pressurize yourself. Instead, just take what's available, do what you can do, but don't do more than you more often you have to do. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to do nothing. Mercury is going forward now, so you're beginning to enjoy the fact that Mercury is going forward, but it's early days. Mercury is still going very slowly, and and so I think in a way you're perhaps going a little bit slowly as well, and it's going to take you a little bit of time to adjust to the new situation with Mercury going direct. So Virgo, I don't think there's any pressure, and really Virgo, I don't want to say more often I have to, so or more often is necessary. So that's about it. I think it's an easy day. I don't think there's anything you have to do. I think from a social perspective, there's something about you that is somewhat compelling. I think people are going to like you, and if you take a little bit of an initiative socially, I think you might be quite pleased with the results, but it's not a day for drama, I don't really think. Libra, you might feel that something has to be done, and that if you don't do it now, then maybe you've missed your chance. Well, I suppose what that is about is maybe trying to finish things off. Certain things are not complete. They're almost complete, but not quite. So perhaps you should spend the day making sure that everything is as perfect as is possible, that you haven't missed out on anything. And so if you finished something recently, or very recently, or finishing it today, it's perhaps important to have another look at it, because if you have another look at something, it may be something that you've done to death. You really, really feel you've done it from every angle with nothing more to look at. But if you look at it one more time, I think you might notice something important, and it may be about noticing some kind of imperfection, and you see it, and you've got a chance to correct it, and you make the correction, and then you can say that it's as perfect as possible. Now, it's probably the case that the main aspect today, as far as you're concerned, Libra, is a semisquare between Venus and Neptune. So, Venus is obviously your ruler, and Venus is in Aquarius, but it's square Neptune. I mean, it's very nice that Venus is in Aquarius. It's a great place for Venus. You can do things that you're not just comfortable with, but you can do things that you're really good at, and it's not a time for compromising your creative talent. It's you, and it is special. But then Venus makes a semi-square to Neptune, and at some level you might be confused or distracted. And it could be, with that Venus semi-square Neptune, that you're doing something well, you're doing a really good job of it, you're reaching its conclusion, you're reaching a conclusion, perhaps, as I've just suggested, that you're making a couple of corrections, but it's something you feel comfortable with, and it's going well. And then Venus semi-square Neptune, you're distracted. Something happens that you weren't planning on, and it kind of phases you. You're not quite sure how to respond, and it may be about an irrelevant detail. You're perhaps presented with an irrelevant detail, something that you absolutely should not be worrying about today, but it's still placed right in front of you. And the question is, what do you do? And handling the situation in the right way may actually be quite critical. You could respond by just taking something at face value. You see this whatever this thing is, and you just respond in perhaps a fairly impulsive way. You feel you have to respond, but by taking something too seriously, you might be allowing something potentially destructive to move to the center, to move to center stage and cause a lot of damage. And it's all because you're confused. Now, there is another way of dealing with that Neptune, with that Venus semisquare Neptune. It's the fact that the moon is trine Neptune. And I think the moon trine Neptune is perhaps asking you almost to have a little bit of a sense of humour. So if something comes your way which at first sight seems disturbing, even it's almost like other people want you to be disturbed. They're trying to get your attention. Maybe it's not other people, maybe it's a universe. They're trying to distract you, they're trying to tempt you. But moon trine Neptune, is asking you to take notice of something, but just not to take it too seriously. Be ready to smile, to laugh at something, and have a certain levity to it. Because if you take things too seriously at the moment, Libra, that's when they could start causing problems. And you might take the view, if something just comes your way out of nowhere that doesn't really fit in, well, maybe you can deal with it at a later stage. And so Libra, I just think today it's just important to be cool and calm and notice the distractions when they happen. Be able to distinguish between something that is a genuine problem. So this is why I said when you look over your work, make sure that everything is in good order, and if there is a mistake, then obviously correct it. Distinguish between that is a genuine thing that needs to be corrected, and the other thing, something that has been thrown at you, which has nothing to do with what you're doing right now, but people want you to regard it as being significant, and you know, or you should know, that it is not significant. So you have to make the distinction, I think, between what is important, what needs to be dealt with today, and what is really not relevant, not important, and can be dealt with much later. Maybe you don't even have to deal with it at all. Scorpio, we've got the moon continuing to move through Cancer, moving through the last degrees of Cancer. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will still be in the middle of Cancer, but certainly if you're in the Americas, moon is reaching the end of the sign. In fact, this evening, even late afternoon in California, Hawaii, Alaska, late afternoon, the moon will then move into Leo. But while the moon is in Cancer, it makes a trine to Neptune, and I think that as a Scorpio, you can really deal with that. It's not a problem for you, because Scorpio is a water sign, and when things get emotional and when things get a little bit vague and foggy, you can sort of take it in your stride. And perhaps it's because Scorpio is a fixed sign. It's fixed emotion. I mean, you know where you stand emotionally, and so when you're dealing with an environment which is emotionally complicated, or at least emotionally confusing, it's your territory. You can basically make sense of it. So I think that moon trine Neptune, which of course affects your sign, because the moon is in Cancer, trine Scorpio. Neptune is in Pisces, trine Scorpio. So that moon trine Neptune, I think, allows you to be very imaginative, and you can actually take things which to other people are completely confusing, don't make any sense, and you can take these things and you can make them real. And I mean, it could be like picking up a piece of garbage on the side of a road that no one else wants to touch, and you take it, you bring it home, and you turn it into a work of art. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it's perhaps a symbol for what you could do. You take something that no one else can handle, and you can transform it. And in the process of that transformation, you can be really very creative, and you can make garbage into art, for example. But this moon trine Neptune is also just about your imagination and where your imagination can take you. And your imagination might seem sort of vague and useless, as if it's going nowhere, but it's not. It's actually a process by which you are informing yourself. You are informing yourself about what is happening around you, and you're getting impressions. This is nothing that has to be verbalized, I don't think. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a Scorpio. I'm a Gemini. I don't know what those inner processes are like, but I'm guessing that, being a Gemini, I sort of tend to verbalize everything. Even internally, I tend to verbalize everything. And I'm also guessing that maybe if you're a Scorpio, you don't maybe verbalize it so much. I mean, I may be wrong. Of course, it's impossible to look at things, to try to look at things from another person's perspective. It's impossible. It's a fool's errand. But still, I'm thinking that you might be able to feel things and imagine things and not have to verbalize them, and it allows you to make sense of the world. And this making sense of your environment is important, and you are informing yourself, and over the next couple of days you'll perhaps realize that your investment is actually very useful. So I don't know what your plans are over the next couple of days, but when the moon moves into Leo, when the moon makes a conjunction to Mars, which is sort of tomorrow, then you'll realize that your imaginings weren't for nothing. It really did have a purpose. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, the main aspect today is a semisquare between Venus and Neptune. And Venus, of course, has relevance for relationships in the Scorpio chart. And so Venus semisquare Neptune may represent a person who is confused, a person who is confusing, a person who finds it difficult to be straightforward. It may even be a person who is actually lying. So that's what Venus semisquare Neptune can mean. And so in terms of your relationships, then it's possible that some people are not being honest, and they may be deliberately trying to confuse you. Or perhaps they're trying to confuse themselves, or rather they want to confuse themselves, or they are confusing themselves, and that self-confusion is becoming confusion in terms of confusing everyone around them. And I don't really think you can necessarily take what anyone says at face value. So if you're told something, don't necessarily believe them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're lying, at least consciously lying. With lying, you have to think about the intention, don't you? I suppose, what do they call it? The mens rea. That is the intention behind the act. So what is it? So if someone is lying, it doesn't mean that they are consciously trying to deceive. at least trying to deceive the outside world or anyone like you. They're perhaps trying to make sense of a confusing situation, and they may find it easier to believe that something is true when it's actually not true, and to reinforce that belief they might want to tell other people that something is true. So that might be the origin of an apparent lie. So for your part, you can just understand what's happening, and you can allow people to work things out in their own time. And so it's not a good idea to ask people for something for something which they don't really want to give the answer. Okay, you can ask someone what the time is, or you can ask someone, I don't know, what the capital city of Japan is. I mean, okay, there's not really much scope for lying there. I suppose you can lie about the time, but if it's something more complex, that's when the apparent lies might start to come about. So in terms of other people, I do think you have to be careful, and I think you have to be tolerant as well. You have to let people develop in their own way and work through things until they actually come to the truth. But just right now, many people are just not ready to speak the truth. Maybe they're not even ready to handle the truth. And just, Scorpio, just be tolerant, and really perhaps you should just concentrate on your own imagination and what you can make with your own imagination, where it's taking you and how it's informing you about the near future. And tomorrow, when the moon moves into Leo, when the moon makes a conjunction of Mars, I think things will be very different. Sagittarius, it may feel that things are a little bit slow, and indeed they might be very slow. It might be that everything takes a long time, and you may be aware that just some people are just delaying things almost for the sake of it. And I think that is probably true, that some people are afraid of change. They know that change is inevitable. They can see change all around them, but they want to hang on. They want to hang on to the past. And it's possible that you're the same. Sagittarius is supposed to be a sign that is very future orientated, but sometimes the present and the past may seem more comfortable than the future, and so you don't really want to step into the future, or you're not ready to, and maybe that's okay. Perhaps you should just take things as they are, and you with the moon in Cancer, making a trine to Neptune, allow yourself to drift a little. It may even be, it's like when you've got an alarm clock and you put it on snooze. Maybe that's what today should be about. You understand that at some stage you have to wake up, but today you don't really want to wake up. You don't really want to have to deal with the reality of the present. So perhaps just put things on snooze. Tomorrow's a different day. The moon will move out of Cancer into Leo, and things will be different. But with the moon in Cancer, it's a difficult placement, moon in Cancer, for a Sagittarius. It's difficult in the sense of it's not kind of typical. It's not very energetic. The sign Cancer doesn't have much spark to it, and it's more reflective. I suppose Sagittarians do need to reflect. I suppose it's going back to the sleep analogy. We need our sort of REM sleep, or I don't know, I'm not a great expert on sleep, but we need all of that. And so perhaps at some level, Sagittarius, you are recharging, and allow yourself to recharge and don't feel that there's any real pressure to do anything. Now, if you're in the Americas, it may be that you come out of snooze this evening, and that is because the moon does change sign. It moves from Cancer into Leo. I don't know, it happens New York time. It will happen, I believe, at 11 minutes to 7 in the evening. Okay, in California, that will be late afternoon. So if you're in America, it's late afternoon, early evening, moon moves into Leo, and there is a change. And I think that you will start to feel more alive, more awake, and things will be clearer. And you'll be better able to deal with your environment, and I think you'll have a sense of the way things should be, and you'll have a sense of the various connections. So if you are in the Americas, and I don't know what you're doing in this evening. I mean, it does seem that Americans often go to bed early. I mean, certainly compared to Britain, Americans seem to go to bed earlier than people in the UK. Maybe maybe I'm wrong on that, but going for walks at night, you see people do seem to close down quite quickly, and it's also like in America, I've made this observation compared with the UK, that noisy parties, in the UK, particularly if you're living in London. I haven't lived in London for a long time, but other people's noise, particularly living in a city in the UK, is an issue. But I've noticed that in America, when people have noisy parties, they just suddenly stop at around 11. That wouldn't happen in the UK. Maybe it does happen. Of course, it does happen in America. But I've just noticed there's a slight difference, and Americans are more sensible about closing things down early. I mean, sorry, this is a complete distraction. What I was trying to say is that you might be closing down early as a Sagittarian, and because you're closing down early, the fact that the moon goes into Leo late in the day, this evening, may not have any impact on you. And like everyone else in the world, you may not experience moon going into Leo in all its glory until tomorrow. But my broad message is, Sagittarius, wherever you are, it just may be a day when you don't have to do anything. You can put things on snooze. But tomorrow is a different day. I think tomorrow you can be more energetic. Capricorn, you may feel today that at some level you are at other people's disposal, and you shouldn't regard that as being negative. It may be a certain sense of responsibility that you understand things that other people don't understand, and you understand what is available. A lot of people do not understand what is available and what help is available, and this means that if anyone's got a problem, particularly a practical problem, you are the perfect person to visit, to get advice from, because your down-to-earth approach can actually be really, really useful. And at the same time, I think you're going to be very good at dealing with bureaucracy. And if you have to deal with bureaucracy over the course of a day, I don't know, government departments, having to call tax offices, whatever you have to deal with, you'll be good at it. And in fact, you'll be good at it in terms of helping other people. Some people can't deal with authority. Maybe authority frightens them, and you don't have that kind of fear. So I don't know what your plans are. I don't know what your opportunities are. But if you have a chance to help people work out their lives, work out their relationship to the government, then I think that's perhaps something you should do, because I think you'll get a certain sense of satisfaction about it. And if you have to deal with bureaucracy and government, then today might be a good chance to work it all out. And perhaps if there's some phone call you've been dreading making, you don't want to make it. Perhaps you'll think you're going to be on the phone for 3 hours and it's just no one's going to answer. Maybe now might be the time to do it, because you'll have the patience, and there'll be something about you that's quite calm, and you can perhaps cut through the nonsense, even cut through the red tape. So that's one thing you could be thinking about today. And I think that you're going to be very good at de-escalating things and de-dramatizing things. Yeah, other people might have a sense of drama. They might think that things are very serious, but being a Capricorn, you can reduce things to what they really are. And yeah, that's what people need at the moment, because there are no planets in Earth signs except for Uranus, and so people don't really know what's going on. They don't have a sense of grounding. But you, being a Capricorn, you're always a Capricorn. You are an Earth sign with this Capricorn. So with your Capricorn nature, and so however confusing you are, you perhaps represent a rock of stability. And I think that is something that other people are going to really appreciate. Though you have to be aware that in terms of your own activities and your own ambitions, that things are not always going to be clear. And we do have a semisquare between Venus and Neptune. Now, I'm making quite a big deal about this Venus semisquare Neptune because there aren't very many aspects going on today. So Venus square Neptune is the main aspect, and it might seem a minor aspect, it might seem obscure, but perhaps because there aren't any other strong aspects, it takes on more importance than usual. And with Venus semisquare Neptune, you may find that some of your efforts to make progress are, at least in the first instance, thwarted. People try to come up with reasons why something can't happen. They come up with elaborate explanations, but you shouldn't take things at face value. If you are told something, even by someone who appears to have a lot of authority, don't believe them. They might be trying to just fob you off. And this is why perhaps it's a good day for dealing with bureaucracy, because you won't be fobbed off. You'll understand that people are just trying to have a simple life. They don't want to deal with complicated issues, complicated questions. But if you're quietly persistent, you can tell someone they're wrong. Maybe they've misunderstood something. Maybe they need to consult someone higher up in the organization. Just keep being persistent like this. And that way, Capricorn, you will be able to cut through the confusion. But it's not just about bureaucracies. I suppose you may find that people you have to work with, people that are important in terms of achieving your ambitions, whatever these ambitions are, in the first instance, they're not going to be tremendously helpful, and they may be a bit vague. But again, just be quietly persistent. Demand action, but not without. You mustn't shout. Just repeat yourself over and over again, Capricorn, and then I think in your own quiet way, things will start moving in your favor. And in the end, I think that people will realize that you are someone to be respected, and you do know what you're doing, and you're not really someone to be defied or contradicted. Aquarius, the moon continues to move through Cancer. I mean, it actually does move into Leo late in the day if you're in the Americas. But, while the moon is moving through Cancer, I think that what you're perhaps trying to do is make sure everything is on an even keel. That's what matters, and you don't want any confusion. You don't want anything to upset things, and the more straightforward and organized they can be, the better. And I suppose that reminds us that Aquarius might have a reputation for being interesting and perhaps even a little bit eccentric, but Aquarius is a fixed sign, and Aquarius does like to do things in a particular way, and I think today in particular you want things done properly. Now, that's not always going to be possible. Things might crop up over the day which don't make sense, and you can't fit them in. So it's like you're trying to do a jigsaw puzzle, and you suddenly find a piece which doesn't look like any other piece. It doesn't even look as if it's from the same puzzle. And then you have to work it out. What do you do with this piece? And I suppose your first inclination might be to just throw it away, or just think it belongs to a different puzzle. But there is a way for it to fit in. And it's a situation, Aquarius, where you don't want to be mentally lazy. So if you come across something today that doesn't make sense, then work on it. It may take some time before you can actually complete the puzzle, and it's just important that you don't give up at the last moment. And there will be, I think, that moment of inspiration where it suddenly clicks. So Aquarius, it really is important that you are very persistent, and at the same time, the moon is moving through late Cancer, so you should regard the situation as being one where you are actually close to completion. It's been difficult, but you're moving towards the end, and it would be a shame if you were to give up right at the end because something was too difficult or it didn't make sense. So keep going. Now, in the Americas, the moon does change sign this evening or even late afternoon, and it change sign from Cancer to Leo. And so moon changing sign from Cancer to Leo, that is an important change. And it does depend to some extent on your situation, but if you are in the company of other people and you're in America and it is this evening, there might be some kind of change. You might find that people are a little more dynamic than usual, and that they want action, and at the same time it might be a time when people are very open to suggestion. So if you have a suggestion, well, let's do this, let's do that. So that's certainly a possibility for this evening. Although it may be, Aquarius, regardless of where you are, but you have to wait until tomorrow when you really start to feel the moon being in Leo. And certainly if you're not in the Americas, the moon doesn't move into Leo until tomorrow, or very, very late this evening if you're in the UK. So I suppose the general message is, Aquarius, keep going. You're nearly there, and don't give up at the last moment. I should also say something about the fact that Venus is semisquare Neptune. So Venus semisquare Neptune is an important aspect. It's important because it's not a lunar aspect. It involves two planets, and it's the only aspect today involving two planets. So it's arguably the main astrological event. And so with Venus semisquare Neptune, one has to ask, where is the capacity for confusion? That might be a question to ask. Where could you get it wrong? Now, you could get it wrong in terms of something very mundane, and it might be connected with your home or your activities at home. So, be careful about, I don't know, household appliances, the way your home works. Things might go a little bit wrong, particularly if you misuse things, you don't read the instructions. Things like, dishwashers, washing machines, baths, showers, they could present a few aggravations. So when you're dealing with that kind of thing in your home, just be a little more careful than usual, because that could be something that could upset your day if you're not careful. And I suppose it's not just about you, it's perhaps about your family. And so if there are other people around you at home, just make sure they're behaving properly and that they don't do something without thinking. And of course, if they do something without thinking and something goes wrong, well, that could be expensive, but I think it would be unnecessary. So around the home, be careful, read the instructions, and don't do anything careless and impulsive, particularly with sort of machinery, equipment, pipes, that kind of thing in the home. Yeah, so, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm sure it won't happen in the vast majority of cases, but I think I just had to point that out, and we just have to consider how that Venus semisquare Neptune might operate. I should also say, I suppose, if I'm trying to really make the most of that Venus semisquare Neptune, just possible that Venus semisquare Neptune could be a misunderstanding about money, and it's some silly misunderstanding about money. Just not adding up two numbers could be like that, or being double charged for something. It could be you double charging for something. So if I don't know, it depends on your situation, but if you're offering services and people are paying for it, then look at what you're charging someone. Maybe you're undercharging. It's just possible. So there could be some mistake about money today, which I think could be avoidable. Pisces, the moon is making a trine to Neptune, and that trine between the moon and Neptune, for you, I would regard as being mainly fortunate. It's going to allow things to run fairly smoothly, especially on an emotional level, and I think you're going to be in touch with your emotions, and I think you're going to be in touch with other people's emotions as well. And you'll have a good sense of what people are feeling and what their sensibilities are. And I think if anyone is upset or worried about something, I think you're going to know about it straight away. But that moon's trine Neptune seems to have quite an artistic feel to it, especially as the moon is not just trine Neptune, it's actually sextile Uranus as well. Uranus in its own way can be very artistic, because Uranus can be quite an imaginative planet, and it can be quite radical. It can have ideas, and so it may be a time, Pisces, when you can do something of real quality, and do something that is original, whatever it is. And of course, Pisces is a sign that's often associated with art and creativity, and so if the muse moves you, don't resist it. Go where the muse wants you to go, and don't think about it too much. Just do go with the artistic flow. And perhaps, Pisces, you shouldn't feel that you necessarily have to do anything today. I think that there may be a bit of pressure, but I don't think that's what you want to do. You're not inclined to really take any initiatives over the course of the day. You just want things to just carry on. I think that is a feeling that you have. Once you're in a state and you're relatively comfortable in that state, you don't want change. And in fact, you might be surprisingly resistant to change. And that's all right, because change is not required today. But at some stage, you are going to have to make some kind of a move. In fact, it might be as early as this evening, particularly if you're in the Americas, but certainly over the next 24 hours, you're going to have to sort of change your approach in some way. So that's certainly possible. So don't get too complacent. And you're not alone. I have been saying similar things to other signs. So don't get too complacent. But I think for the moment, Pisces, you're fine where you are. And in fact, where you are is where you can do the best work. I think if you today spent a lot of time sort of traveling or going somewhere else, I don't think you'd feel satisfied. I don't think that you would feel comfortable. But tomorrow there are other things to talk about. The Sun is actually starting to make a square to Neptune, and that square between the Sun and Neptune is exact tomorrow. I think on a positive note, that Sun square Neptune does give a boost to your imagination and allows you to be more creative. But there are other things to consider with that Sun square Neptune. It can be a confusing influence. I think, though, it's more about you confusing other people from them confusing you, though. But anyway, I'll talk about Sun square Neptune in detail when I look at the 12 signs for tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. And so I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 36, which is darkening of the light. Now, don't go away. It's not as bad as it looks. In fact, it all ends up fine. But the broad principle of darkening of the light is as it sounds. Something is being shielded, something is being hidden. And it may be that your light is being hidden, perhaps because you're not being appreciated. And one image of darkening of the light is of a talented court official, very talented, but who is being ignored. And so if the court official is being ignored, he is the light. He can do so much for the court, but who cares? The ruler doesn't want to know about him. So that's one way of seeing it. And it may just be that whatever you've got to offer, you feel you've got so much to offer, but people are not going to be appreciative today. And that is the way it is. And it's not a permanent situation. And the key thing is, the light is being darkened, but the light still exists. And so if we actually look at the structure of this hexagram, the top 3 lines are all broken. So that's quite a sort of a negative and receptive force on top. At the bottom 3 lines is fire, is the sun. And that's you, that's your light, that's our light. And it is being obscured for the moment. And there is a moving line, a single moving line. A second line from the bottom moves. And the I Ching talks about an injury. And it's talking about a battle in which good is fighting dark, and I suppose you are in the battle. I suppose you are fighting the forces of darkness, however you see the forces of darkness. We don't want to be too dramatic about it. And there is an injury, not a serious injury, but there is an injury. For some reason, the I Ching, I've looked at 3 versions of the I Ching, and they all talk about an injury in the left thigh. Now, one view of that is injury in the left thigh means that you are injured by someone sort of coming up behind you. There's a certain deception to that injury. But still, it's not a serious injury. And the I Ching is quite sure that there is a way of getting out of the situation, and that means your horse could carry you away, for example, or help is at hand. Maybe it's the ruler coming to help you out. So help is certainly there, and so it's just very important. Not to panic. And yeah, there is a struggle, and I suppose one has to say, if one wants to be completely negative about this, look at the worst possible sense and take it literally. I suppose watch out for street crime, you could say. I mean, with darkening of the light, with that second line moving, being injured, sort of a certain deception there. I don't know, someone coming up behind you and stealing your phone or whatever. I don't know what can happen. But so if you are walking around and in a dangerous area, or even not in a dangerous area, be extra careful. Keep your eyes open. That is one way of looking at that moving line. Now, the line does move, and because it moves to a second hexagram. And it moves to hexagram 11, which is peace. Very different. It's in some respects, it's the best hexagram in the book. One of the best hexagrams in the book. Everything is in the right place. Heaven is on earth, earth is on heaven. We've got the broken lines remain on top like they were in the previous hexagram, but now all the bottom lines are straight. They're unbroken. And so perhaps this is talking about there being some drama over the course of the day, maybe some injury of some nature, maybe a psychological injury, maybe an upset, maybe some kind of delay, something annoying us, but we get over it. And it seems that we end the day on sort of quite a fortunate note. And in the end, I suppose we perhaps get the better of the powers of darkness, and perhaps we have a chance to show our light. But everything is calm at the end. And now, I suppose I have to look at some royals. I suppose there's a sense of balance here. I mean, I looked at Harry and Meghan yesterday, so I suppose I should look at some of the other royals, perhaps the more important royals. And so I suppose I wanted to start with Kate. People say, if you looked at Meghan, why aren't you looking at Kate? Well, okay, I will look at Kate, and to begin with, and just to get some ideas about some of the things that she might be experiencing at the moment, and perhaps in the near future. So here is Catherine's chart. I don't actually want to say very much about her chart, but just a reminder that she was born on an eclipse. She was born on an eclipse of the moon, and you can see that she has Sun opposition moon. The moon is conjunct the north node, the Sun is conjunct the south node. The way I see that full moon is that the moon in Cancer conjunct the north node represents really where she should be going, what she should be doing. And I see moon in Cancer conjunct the south node as someone who should be keeping a relatively low profile, and someone who should be looking after herself. It's perhaps also about nurturing, making sure that she's safe and secure and really not in the public eye. and not having to do things other people's way. But she has got the Sun in Capricorn conjunct the South Node, and I see that as being her and her royal obligations, her royal duties. And given that, I would have said that at some level she should not have married into the royal family. It's not her. I think she made some kind of mistake there. I mean, that's my opinion. And you could say also that she's got Saturn square the Sun and the Moon. I mean, it's really a very, very powerful aspect. Sun opposition Moon, Saturn on the square. It is difficult. And yeah, for her to be in the public eye, it can't have helped, and it must have really undermined her. I don't think we can necessarily say, oh, she got cancer, got sick because she married into the royals, but it certainly can't have helped, can it? And so that's the broad chart. And in terms of what's happening at the moment, well, we know that she got sick a year ago. She had this cancer diagnosis. As far as I know, the general view is that she's recovered. She's got over it. And I think they talked about her having preventative chemotherapy. But as far as the future and what's been happening, it might actually be a good idea to look at solar arc direction. So Catherine is coming up to her 43rd birthday. So in terms of solar arc directions, we take 1 degree equals 1 year. And so we would move every planet 43 degrees. So that gives us her solar arc direction. So I've calculated these solar arc directions for for December the 16th, for today. And so the question is, do these solar arc directions make any aspects to her natal chart? So I'm interested by her solar arc directed Saturn, which is at 5 degrees 24 Sagittarius. Now, in her natal chart, she has a Sun-Saturn square, because it's part of that T-square. So that Sun-Saturn square is difficult. She's also got a Moon-Saturn square. That Sun-Saturn square, it may be about her health. It may also be about the men in her life. I suppose her sons, her husband, her father-in-law. And that Sun-Saturn square has been hit by that directed Saturn. So a year ago, Saturn directed was semisquare her Sun, was making a 45-degree aspect to her Sun. So that was pretty much at the same time as she got sick, as we had this announcement that she had cancer and everything else. So that was Saturn semisquare her Sun. Saturn is now moving on to make a semisquare with her Saturn. So you can see in probably about just over a year, 18 months, Saturn will be semisquare Saturn. So Saturn is actually halfway between the semisquare of the Sun and the semisquare of the Saturn. In other words, she's got Saturn conjunct her directed Saturn conjunct her Sun-Saturn midpoint. That is not a great aspect, not a great direction. And I know we have to look at other things in her chart, but I do think that she is under a certain amount of pressure. Now, that may not relate to her health. It may relate to just the pressures of being a royal and having to go back into circulation. But perhaps deep down, things aren't as great as they look. And there may be things bothering her. And she may not be entirely comfortable with her public life. And it's perhaps becoming particularly apparent to her now. Maybe that's just her Moon in Cancer conjunct the North Node asking for attention. And we have another thing brewing. Not there yet, probably a couple of years, but her directed Uranus is at 1641 Capricorn. So her natal Uranus was at 3 degrees 8 Sagittarius, so it's now sort of moved on. 40 something degrees. And so Uranus is moving towards a conjunction of her sun. So over the next few years, Uranus will be opposition her moon, it'll be conjunct her sun, and it will be square her Saturn. So the next few years could be very difficult for her. And she may be starting to feel it already, though probably not. But the next few years is about turmoil and having to adjust to quite major changes. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about her health. It may be talking about the environment in which she is living. I mean, she is, after all, a queen in waiting. And if and when William becomes king, she becomes queen, and her profile becomes really quite intense. And really, she really does have a high profile. She's already got a high profile. So just on the basis of solar arc directions, things do look difficult for her at the moment, and I think they may continue to be difficult. And I think, of course, if I was advising her, I would suggest that she just backs off on all her royal duties permanently. I don't think these royal duties are good for her. I mean, that's my view, on the basis of the fact that she's got Sun conjunct the South Node in Capricorn and the Moon conjunct the North Node in Cancer. And that's all I want to say on Catherine. Now, turning to William, here is Prince William's chart. Now, with William, I do want to say a few things about his transits. Firstly, he's got Pluto transits. Pluto is now in Aquarius. So Pluto this year, well, it's already squaring his Jupiter. It's now squaring his midheaven. So the midheaven, okay, can be about the parental axis. The IC would be his father, but Pluto squaring his midheaven, the whole way in which he presents himself to the world is changing. And Pluto, over the course of 2025, will make that square to the midheaven. And so that's coming up. And so for him, that could be dramatic changes, particularly as Pluto is not just squaring his midheaven, but it's also squaring his Jupiter. So it's kind of squaring his Jupiter midheaven midpoint. I mean, I suppose you could see that in a fortunate way, but that suggests increased prominence to me. He really is forced into the public eye. I mean, that may be a way of looking at it, but that's not the only thing going on. His sun is at 0 degrees 6 Cancer. And so next year, Saturn and Neptune move into Aries. In other words, Saturn and Neptune are going to be square his sun. And that is going to be difficult, I think. Really difficult. This puts him under a huge amount of pressure, and I think there is a certain amount of fear. And this is not just about next year, because Saturn and Neptune, they go retrograde, and they go. So it's 2005, 2006, 2025, 2026. He's got Saturn and Neptune making the square to his sun, and I do think that's going to be tough for him. And this may be indicative of some kind of change of role, some change in his life that he has to take into account, and it's not a change that he's comfortable with. By the way, that sun is sort of opposition Neptune and opposition true black moon Lilith. So the fact that he's got sun opposition Neptune makes that Neptune square his sun all the more poignant. And of course, Saturn having made a few years later, Saturn having made the square to conjunct square to his sun, will go on to make an opposition to his Mars. So Saturn and Neptune in a slower way is going to cause him a lot of issues here, I think, over the next few years. But immediately we need to be thinking about Saturn and Neptune square his sun. So that's William's chart. I don't think there's anything specific about solar arc directions. I did look at his solar arc directions briefly, but I don't think there's anything I really want to talk about here. There are his solar arc directions. Saturn. Well, you can see that recently Saturn has been opposition his Venus. So over the year, Saturn was opposition his Venus, and I suppose solar arc directed Saturn was opposition his Venus, and I suppose that may say something about his wife's illness. And so that's kind of something we already know, but I didn't want to spend too much time trying to find the solar arc direction which might have fitted. But it's the transits that I really wanted to mention. The fact that he has got Saturn and Neptune square his Sun, and Pluto square his midheaven and his Jupiter. Then there's King Charles. And in terms of King Charles, I did want to look about all these theories about how sick he is he about to die? And I'm doing this in an absolutely theoretical sense. And when we're talking about astrology and death, one astrologer who was working at the beginning of the 19th century put a lot of effort into astrology and death. He wrote a whole book about it, examples of him successfully predicting people's deaths. So John Worsdale, I think he was working in the English county of Lincolnshire, and he was looking for something called the terminus vitae. Terminus vitae is Latin for obviously end of life. He called it the terminus vitae. I think he was quite pompous, and so astrologers like to do that. They like to sort of drift into Latin every now and then to show how learned they are. But the terminus vitae was the direction that killed you, and it was a primary direction, and I'll be talking about primaries in a moment. And he was working in Lincolnshire, and this young woman, I think she was in her very early 20s, I think she visited him for a consultation, but she wasn't serious. She was doing it for a laugh, and she wanted her chart done. So he did he did her chart, and she wanted to know when she was going to get married. That was what she asked, and he said to her, "You're never going to get married. You're not going to get married, because I see something dreadful happening," and I think connected with water. And she said, "You got it wrong. I'm about to get married. You're wrong." And he said, "No, I'm right." And she left his practice, and she was walking, but he sent someone after her to warn her, to really make it clear. I mean, that's taking things too far, to send someone out to give a warning. He should have said his piece and then shut up. But no, he warned her about drowning, and he sent someone to make this warning. So what did she go and do? Almost as if to prove him wrong, she took a boat trip. She went on a boat down some canal or river in Lincolnshire. And of course, what happened? Of course, she fell in and she drowned. So you could say in this example that John Worsdale drove this poor woman to her death. Or maybe you shouldn't make light of astrologers. This is what astrologers do when they get annoyed. And so that was his broad approach. Obsessed about death, I would have said quite an arrogant man. And in this case, he may well have in some ways contributed to her death. Now, when we talk about terminus vitae, he's talking about a primary direction. So primary directions is not a technique that is used very much now, but up until the 19th century, it was the mainstay of Western predictive astrology. This is what Placidus used. All the big astrologers of the Renaissance, they would use primary directions, and I think that you can take it back to Ptolemy. So, what is a primary direction? A primary direction is when you look at the primary motion. The primary motion represents the motion of the Earth after you were born. So, looking at King Charles's chart, he was born at 9:14 p.m. On November the 14th, 1948. And you can see that he was born with a Uranus-Jupiter opposition, a very close Uranus-Jupiter opposition. And it was in the 12th house. So what we then do is we track the positions of the planets in the hours after he was born. So he's, 76 years old. So we'd ask the question, what were the planets doing when you move the Earth 76 degrees after birth? So if you move the planet 76 degrees, you look at a chart which is actually just over 5 hours later, I think. And so remember Jupiter Saturn in the 12th, but if we move the chart just over 5 hours after he was born, so this is now moving into November the 15th at 2:22 a.m., so that's 5 hours and 8 minutes after he was born. That Jupiter Saturn opposition, which used to be in the 12th, has moved up onto the midheaven. So that means from a primary perspective, at the moment, he's got Uranus hitting his midheaven and he's got Jupiter on his IC. So that's one primary happening. And when you're dealing with primary direction, there are two types of primary direction. There's a mundo primary direction and there's a zodiacal primary direction. And we're very used to working with the zodiac. But the mundo aspects work sort of house to house. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but where a planet was when someone was born, that part of the space, you're looking to an aspect of that part of space, and so that's what you're doing. And yeah, primary directions are difficult to calculate, but there are programs now that work it out pretty much instantly. And one program, Pi Marinus, a very good program, is completely free. You can just Pi Marinus, look it up on Google it, you can download it for free. I think it works on pretty much every system, Windows, Linux, whatever. And so I used this to try to work out what was happening to him. And in looking at Prince Charles's chart, I was particularly focused on the moon. Now, I must make it clear, in terms of predicting death, I'm doing this in a theoretical way. I'm not predicting when Prince Charles is going to die. I'm just looking at perhaps what John Worsdale would have done. And in order to work out when someone is going to die using Worsdale's system, you have to find the high leg, Hyleg. And the high leg is the giver of life. And it's a particular planet. And there's a certain subjectivity to this. It's not that you can provide a clear-cut rule for finding the high leg, but by and large, if it's a daytime chart, you should kind of be looking to the sun to be the high leg, provided it's in the right house. I don't think a planet can be a high leg if it's in the 8th house. If it's a nighttime chart, you would look to the moon, unless it's in the wrong house. If it's in the 8th house, then it can't be the high leg. But in Charles's chart, the moon is in the 10th house, nighttime chart, the moon is his high leg. So if you were looking for terminus vitae, you would be looking for a stressful aspect, a stressful primary direction to his moon, and that would be potentially the terminus vitae. And using Pi Marinus, so I use this, Pi Marinus software, and let's okay, so you probably can't read this bottom thing, so I've blown up the relevant relevant sections. So let me just go through what this actually means. So on the left we see M. That means it's a mundo aspect, and then this column is the planet which is doing the aspecting. So remember, when I talked about Jupiter and Uranus, we can see Jupiter is making a mundo conjunction to his IC. Uranus is making a mundo conjunction to his MC, and that means the Earth has to turn 77.652 degrees or something, nearly 78 degrees to get that. And then it gives a date for when this happens. July 2026. So we could say around July 26, 2026, and I wouldn't take these exact dates too seriously. There are different ways. This is using the Ptolemy approach. There are different forms of direction. I would be open about it. I would have said, 6 months either side. I mean, I know some people like to be super accurate with primaries, but I think I would just see it as something quite general. And you'd perhaps use other techniques to go into it and try to find a more precise time when this happens. But you could say Charles has Jupiter opposition Uranus. It is that quest for freedom. Uranus on the midheaven, Jupiter on the IC. This may be, for example, a time when he wants to abdicate. That's absolutely the way it could be. Abdication is coming up. And I think it's very likely that he abdicates with this primary coming up, primary about to happen in 2026. But then we see two aspects to his moon. Remember, his moon is his high leg. The moon is the giver of life. And then we see, theoretically, on January the 28th, 2026, directed Saturn is semisquare his moon. And in March 2026, directed Sun is sesquiquadrate his moon. So his high leg receives two stressful aspects, certainly from Saturn, which is a malefic, and also from the Sun. So you might regard, if you were Worsdale, you might regard this aspect here as being the terminus vitae, the aspect that kills him. So theoretically, you could say that his life is in great danger. Perhaps the beginning of 2026, 2025, 2026, and this is time when he's really going to need a lot of medical care. He has to be really careful. But remember, this is theoretical. I don't believe that you can just predict someone's death just by looking at a computer printout. I'm just doing this to just illustrate how astrologers, or how John Worsdale might be looking at it. I mean, maybe I've got it wrong. John Worsdale was very scathing, not just about his clients, but also about other astrologers. He would always have, in his book, he always insulted other astrologers as far as he was concerned. Other astrologers didn't know what they were talking about, and he was the only one. So he was an incredibly arrogant man. And so what one might do then is one might look for secondary confirmation. One might say, well, we know that his moon is under pressure from in terms of the primaries, so we would look for further evidence that his moon is under pressure. So going back to King Charles's chart, you might look at solar returns. You might look at profections, for example. I mean, here is his solar return for November the 14th, 2025. So you could say you see the moon is in the 7th house. It's an angular house. It's conjunct the south node, and it's applying to an opposition of Saturn. And so you've got perhaps confirmation that the moon is under pressure by looking at his by looking at a solar return. But I must emphasize here that I'm just doing this. I really must emphasize this. Astrologers should never, ever predict the death of kings. This is something that they should never do. And so I'm doing this as a theory. I must make this clear. I know it sounds boring, but it is a theoretical exercise. I just wanted to show you how an astrologer like John Worsdale might look at Charles's chart and might try to predict his death. But, we have to remember that Charles has got access to the best medicine in the world, and I see no reason, why he should die over the next couple of years. But I think his chart is just a good example of the way astrology can be used, and one doesn't go around predicting death. I mean, one theoretically knows how to predict death. I mean, one theoretically knows how Worsdale predicted death, but it's not something astrologers really should do. So it's kind of must emphasize it is just a technical note. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.